Okay, so we're back with Schliemann. And the point being, of course, that after Schliemann published his discovery of Priam's treasure, freely admitting he'd smuggled it out of Turkey, the Ottoman government basically said, you can't come back. He desperately wants to get back to work at Hisarlik, but he's not allowed to. So what Schliemann decides to do in 1874 is to travel around Greece instead to try and find some more sites that he might excavate that might provide evidence for the truth of the Trojan War. Well, Schliemann is a great believer in the classical sources. He went to Ithaca. He travelled around Ithaca with the Odyssey in one hand. He identified a bay that matched the description in the Odyssey for the location of Odysseus' palace. When he went to Troy, he found Troy by going there with the Iliad in one hand, looking at the topography, the landscape, and finding a place that matched the description. So he's a great believer in the accuracy of classical sources. In Greece, his main guide is not the Iliad or the Odyssey, but the writings of Pausanias. I've already mentioned Pausanias in an earlier class. He was a Greek writer who actually came from Asia Minor, Anatolia. In the late 2nd century AD, he basically wrote what is the first travel guide, a description of the monuments of Greece. And in this, he gives the locations of various places in Greece that were known of from legend and so forth. And he says in his description that you can find Mycenae, the home of Agamemnon, the leader of the Trojan War, the Achaean side in the Trojan War, somewhere in the Peloponnese in the north of the plain of Argos. Well, this is the area of modern Greece that we call the Peloponnese. This is the plain of Argos here, and Pausanias says it's right at the end of that particular plain. Pausanias describes the stone walls of Mycenae. He says that it's a very familiar landmark, that you could see, he's writing in the late 2nd century, that you could still see the gateway with the 2 lions on it that marked the entrance to the city, and nearby you could see the remains of underground buildings that were treasuries, the places where the kings of Mycenae kept their gold and silver, and how the burial place of Agamemnon was just outside the city walls of Mycenae. Well, from Pausanias and other writers, Schliemann knew the story of Agamemnon. Agamemnon had got back at the end of the 10-year Trojan War to find that his queen, Clytemnestra, had started an affair with one of his officers, Aegisthus. The king, getting back to Mycenae, knows about this, but he's welcomed with a big feast. And while sitting down for dinner, he's murdered, which starts a miniature civil war which lasts for about another 7 years or so. The body of Agamemnon and all those killed in that civil war were, according to Pausanias and other writers, buried in a royal tomb just outside the walls of Mycenae. But Schliemann believes absolutely in the truth of all these writings. He puts his trust in ancient writers. He doesn't believe expert opinion. So he makes his way to Mycenae. As he travels across the plain to get to Mycenae, he sees the remains of underground chambers, underground rooms. These are described as being the treasuries by Pausanias, and the local people still called them the treasuries. So, for example, this is the treasury of Atreus. Atreus was the father of Agamemnon. He then makes his way to the hill above these treasuries, and he can see from the valley below, from where the tombs are right down here, the enormous stone walls that mark the site of Mycenae. And Mycenae really is a very dramatic place, with these stone walls enclosing this hilltop with a palace on the top. As he gets closer to it, he can see that these walls really are massive. Well, they don't look that impressive when you look at it there, but you can see the size of the stone blocks here. Pausanias said that this was built by giants. or rather a giant called Cyclops. And we still talk about this type of walling as being Cyclopean walling, type of wall made by the giants. He makes his way up to the fortifications, goes along and finds, as Pausanias says, a gateway with the remains of 2 lions on the top of it. So he knows he's at Mycenae, the Mycenae described by Pausanias. This is the gateway in which Schliemann got to it, after he cleared it rather. That's Schliemann at the top there, and that's Sophia just sitting down at the base there. And the modern view of it now hadn't really changed that much, except they've removed the gates that go inside there. So Schliemann decides to do a secret excavation there just to see what there is. He finds lots of pottery just inside the Lion Gate. He hears that somebody digging in that same area had previously found gold. He accepts Pausanias' historical truth. He believes in the Iliad. This has to be the Mycenae of King Agamemnon. This is the place where I have to dig next. I'm not allowed to go back to Hisarlik. Well, at first, the Greek government refused to give him a permit to excavate there. They knew of his reputation as a treasure hunter and smuggler and robber. But in 1876, he won his court case against the Ottoman government in Switzerland. It was found in that court case that he had legally taken the 1/3 that belonged to him. He was fined for smuggling it, but not for stealing it. So the Greek government couldn't really argue with Schliemann about this now. He wasn't a treasure hunter. So they said, you can have a permit to excavate Mycenae, but on one condition. A government official must be with you every day when you put a spade in the ground. Well, Schliemann thought, fair enough, that's okay by me. At the same time he gets the permit to work at Mycenae, however, the Ottoman government says, okay, you can go back to Hisarlik. He's torn, which one should he excavate? He goes back to Hisarlik for a few weeks, does a bit more digging, but then makes his way back to Mycenae. Mycenae is going to be the center of his excavations for the next year. At Mycenae, he thinks he's going to prove or provide more proof for the truth of the Iliad. But when he started working at Mycenae, nobody really believed he would find very much. He'd made this amazing discovery at Troy, Priam's treasure. He presented evidence for a Bronze Age city, suggesting that the story of Troy might have some truth in it. Everybody thought he was just basically incredibly lucky in what he found there. Nobody thought he would really find anything at all, actually, at Mycenae. Even so, the experts were shaking their heads. Schliemann, he's a lunatic, he's crazy. He believes everything written in these Greek stories. Schliemann puts his hand in his pocket, he gets 63 workmen, and he starts working at the site. He gets one group of workmen to clear the Lion Gate, and that was the result of their work, as you see it there. Another group of workmen he sends to excavate one of the treasuries, the same treasury of Atreus. And Sophia is given that job, and here you see in this drawing there's Sophia with her workmen inside it. She finds that basically there's nothing in this one or any of the others, but she studies it pretty carefully, and she comes to the conclusion that it was probably a tomb, not a treasury, not a storehouse. And it is, in fact, a classic type of Bronze Age tomb in Greece. We know that, Schliemann didn't. What we call a beehive tomb, because the central chamber is shaped like a beehive. You have a plan and 2 sections there. It's impossible to get a good photograph inside it. That is a photograph, but here we have a drawing that shows you the interior of this much better. Schliemann, meanwhile, is working just inside the Lion Gate. He's heard the rumour that gold had been found there previously. He's found lots of pottery there, so he starts to make a careful investigation of that area. What he finds as he starts working inside the Lion Gate, which is just down there, is this, what we know as the grave circle of Mycenae. In that area, the whole area was full of pottery of a very characteristic type. We call it late Helladic ware 1, late Helladic ware 2. It's very distinctive with these spiral ornamentations. You see it there and there. You see the same type of spiral over here. You've got spiral decoration there. You've also got spirals on this. It's a very, very distinctive type of pottery. He doesn't know what date it is. He can see that it's old, but it's not quite like anything he'd seen at Troy. But it's certainly not from the classical Greek period. It's not one of these black figure vases or a red figure vase. So he keeps on working in that area. And eventually what he finds is that he's digging inside a large circular structure built of a double row of stone slabs, something like 19 meters in diameter. This is what it looks like today. Now, when Schliemann found the top of this, he remembers his classical sources. There is a play by a Greek writer, Euripides, in which he talks about what happened to Agamemnon. Euripides says that after Agamemnon was killed, he was buried within a circular setting of stones. That in years afterwards, this became the meeting place of the elders of Mycenae. Pausanias says that the grave is outside the walls of Troy. Euripides doesn't quite say where it is, but this is actually inside the walls of Troy. Well, Schliemann, of course, his usual unscientific self, his faith in the absolute sources, his absolute belief in these, he immediately announces, I have found the burial place of Agamemnon. For the next 4 months, the Schliemann's worked inside the stone circle, the Greek official in attendance every single day to watch what he was doing. And eventually Schliemann found the tops of 6 graves, but one of them seemed to have been robbed. But he found these rectangular enclosures, which obviously went down some depth in the grave, inside the soil. Each of these rectangular shafts was something like 3 to 3.5 meters wide, 4 to 6.5 meters long. And they went down to a depth roughly about sort of 3 to 4 meters in the ground like that. As they started excavating in these graves, they immediately started finding a wide range of remarkable objects. The graves contain 19 burials altogether. All of the burials were literally covered or with masses of gold objects. This is just a selection of some of the material from the various graves there. Here's beautiful decorated gold cups that show a lion hunt. He would find electrum vessels. Electrum is a natural mixture of gold and silver. You can find it in Turkey. The first coins were made in Turkey at a place called Sardis, and they were made out of electrum from the nearby river. These graves really did contain the most astonishing range of material. All the men buried in the graves had bronze weapons with them. But sometimes these bronze weapons had had wooden handles which had now disappeared. But other weapons had gold handles, not solid gold, gold foil wrapped around the wood of the handle. In one case, a rock crystal pommel. The pommel is the end of the sword. Rock crystal is not a precious stone, but it's not easy to find, and it's very difficult to actually make into an object. And it's kind of natural glass in a sense. So all this material was coming from the different graves. Perhaps the most significant thing were finds like this. These are a group of beads from one of the graves, and you can see these blue ones here are made of lapis lazuli. The only place in the ancient world where you can get lapis lazuli is what is now Afghanistan. So Schliemann knew, not just from the gold, but from these lapis lazuli beads, that he was dealing with the graves of very, very important people. Once the news of the first discovery started coming out, of course, suddenly everything had to be protected. Soldiers were sent to guard the site, and every night there were fires burning around Mycenae to stop people coming up to loot it. Typical Schliemann, he said, "This is the first time since the Trojan War that soldiers have guarded Mycenae, that the watchfires have been kept burning." Well, each of the graves were very different, and I'm not going to give you a detailed discussion of each one, because by the end of it you'll be going, wow, more gold, more gold, more gold. And it really does get boring after a while. That's what Howard Carter said when he excavated Tutankhamun's tomb. But let's, for example, look at Shuff Grave 3. This contained the skeletons of 3 women and 2 children. The 2 children were covered with sheet gold decoration, probably intended to preserve their body, but cut out beautifully in gold foil like this in the shape of the body. The heads of the women had gold diadems, simple crowns that would basically be fixed into the hair like this, that would just form around the front part of the head. The clothes of everybody buried in that grave were decorated with gold clothing discs, each about 1.5 centimeters in diameter. And there were other cutouts of gold in different designs as well. There's a wide range of gold jewellery, including these massive gold earrings, which are really big, and they would really make your ears go down quite large. Shuff Grave 3, assorted jewellery, as displayed now in Athens. You can get some idea of the wealth of these graves. This is just a Shuff Grave 3 material here. You can see these gold cutouts from decorating clothes. You've got bracelets down here, more of these gold decorations for clothing, more diadems, gold wraparound belts and things like that. Shuff Grave 4, in many ways, produced the most exciting material. It contained 3 male and 2 female bodies, all of them with gold decoration. The most significant find, as far as Schliemann was concerned, in Shuff Grave 4, was this decorated dagger. It's made of bronze. It looks like it's iron, but it's made of bronze, but it's inlaid with silver, gold, and electrum. And what it shows is a lion hunt, as you can see here, and Schliemann immediately realized that the shape of the shields carried by these warriors was something that had never appeared in Greek art. That this was indicating the existence of a kind of warrior society which dated to before the time of the Parthenon. It's Bronze Age. He knows, broadly speaking, it's Bronze Age in date. The male burials in Shuff Grave 4 each had what we call a death mask over them. These are pieces of gold, not much thicker than about sort of 3 millimeters, something like that, beaten out with this beautiful design, presumably a portrait of the person that was actually buried beneath them. They were over the face of these bodies. Shuff Grave 4 also produced gold breastplates. And again, one of the breastplates with this characteristic spiral decoration, which Schliemann was beginning to realize was the most characteristic form of decoration on the pottery and everything else at Mycenae. The women, again, with a wide range of jewellery. So you've got gold bracelets like that, the remnants of a gold plate, gold brooches, various objects that were fastened to their clothing originally. Shuff Grave 4 also produced some evidence of a type that fits in with the Iliad and the Odyssey. This is a rhyton. It actually measured about that high, I suppose, but really we're looking at it the wrong side. A rhyton is a drinking cup, and they're mentioned in the Iliad and the Odyssey. And the idea is for the great warriors of the time, I mean, you can't put this down. It doesn't have any feet. So you fill it with wine and then you drank it like that, you see. It was part of the warrior's feasting arrangement. There was also this silver and gold rhyton. Again, the same type of thing. That's actually the top. That's what you would drink out of. The idea being, of course, that as you drink out of these things, people begin to see the gold lion's mask, or in this case, the bull's head. Shaftgrave 5 produced another decorated dagger. Shaftgrave 5 had 3 male burials, almost as rich in gold as the other ones. Again, one of these beautiful inlaid daggers. In this case, what you've got is a panther, a cat of some kind, a wild cat of some kind, chasing after ducks and capturing them as well. These animals existed in ancient Greece, they existed in Turkey until comparatively recently. So it's not that unusual a decoration. A gold box, again, with spiral decoration and things like that. A remarkable write-on made from an ostrich egg. Well, lapis lazuli comes from Afghanistan. Ostrich eggs have to come from Africa. So Schliemann could see this evidence for a society which was rich enough to basically import objects from all over the Mediterranean world. Shaftgrave 5 also had its death mask as well. It's said that when Schliemann lifted one of these death masks, he saw the perfectly preserved face of the person underneath it. He said, "I have seen the face of Agamemnon," and sent a telegram to the Greek king announcing that. The only problem is, we don't know which gold mask he lifted. In most books, you'll find this one illustrated as being the gold mask of Agamemnon. The probability is that that's the actual one there. As far as Schliemann was concerned, by the end of that year, his finds had demonstrated 2 things. This was certainly, Mycenae was certainly the capital of a wealthy ruler of the Bronze Age state. The graves belonged to people of the highest social rank who had lived there. Some of them clearly were warriors. The rulers of this place were wealthy. They could import things from Afghanistan and from Africa. Everything he found at Mycenae convinced him that the story of the death of Agamemnon, the story about Mycenae at the start of the Trojan War, was absolutely true. But when he excavated the last grave, Schliemann telegraphed the king of Greece, saying what he'd found, saying that he'd found the bodies of King Agamemnon and the other members of the royal family. The newspapers took up the story. The public believed everything that was published in the newspapers. All the experts who laughed at his work now found themselves in a bit of a problem. There was no doubt that Schliemann had found evidence of a Bronze Age civilization in Troy, and now he had found evidence of a Bronze Age civilization in Greece. The Bronze Age was the time of the Trojan War. But although they accepted that he had made some very exceptional finds, they also pointed out that Schliemann's very quick at jumping to conclusions. For the general public, it's different. Homer has been brought to life. The Trojan War has been brought to life. Schliemann's discoveries at Mycenae, as I said, were publicized in all the European newspapers. The experts had to accept he had found something. But what had he found? Well, when the experts started looking at this material, the first thing they discovered was there is nothing like it anywhere else known of in Europe. So again, the rumor comes up, was Priam's treasure really bought in the covered market in Constantinople? Had Schliemann done the same thing here? Well, Schliemann was able to answer that very easily. First of all, he said was, well, if there is nothing else like it anywhere in Europe, how could I find material like this in Constantinople? But more to the point, remember the Greek government didn't trust him? He had to have a Greek official with him every time he turned a piece of soil. He had a witness, an absolute witness to everything he had found. But Schliemann realized, though, that the depth of scholarly opinion, academic opinion, was against him. He needed to prove that Mycenae was not unique, not a one-off site. And so in 1876, he turned his attention to another site just to the south of Mycenae, a place called Tiryns. Pausanias mentions this. It doesn't feature in any of the other literature, But Pausanias says that this is a site very much like the one at Mycenae, and indeed it is. This is a view of Tiryns from a distance. That's the entranceway to Tiryns, so you can get some idea of how high these walls are. They're something like 20 meters high. And as you can see, they're the same type of walling that we had at Mycenae. Schliemann did a quick excavation inside Tiryns. What he wanted to do was to find more material to prove that Mycenae, what he'd found at Mycenae was not unique. He found traces of a palace, but a much more important discovery was he found pottery of late Helladic ware 1 and 2. The same type of pottery he'd found in a grave circle at Mycenae, which proved that the two sites had to be of the same general period, and that, as far as Schliemann was concerned, was proof that he had found evidence of a Bronze Age civilization covering a larger area. In 1878, Schliemann published his Mycenae, an account of the work at Mycenae and Tiryns. In 1882, he starts his third season at Troy. But he's now realized that if he really wants to prove what he's finding, he's got to have somebody who's an archaeologist with him. And so he takes an assistant with him, Wilhelm Dorpfeld. Wilhelm Dorpfeld, a German archaeologist, had trained on the German excavations at Olympia, which are also mentioned in the textbook. At Olympia, the archaeologists, professional archaeologists, were working with the best methods of the day. Schliemann basically just dug holes everywhere. So Dorpfeld comes along to help Schliemann at Mycenae, at Troy. Dorpfeld starts to work out the sequence of events at Troy. Schliemann knew he had dug through at least 6 cities, and he found a 7th underneath. But which was the real Troy? This is what the problem was. Dorpfeld decided he was going to sort it out. Well, Schliemann got rather bored with this, and so he decided to go back to Tiryns to do some more work. 1884, he's 64 years old. He works inside the center of Tiryns. And what he finds are the remains of a palace which matches the descriptions of palaces in the Iliad and the Odyssey. It has a very large courtyard. It has storerooms on either side and private rooms. It even has a private toilet. And it has a great entrance hall, a main building with a roof supported by pillars. The type of building described inside in the Iliad, a type of building we know as a megaron, and I give you the name now because I think it'll be coming up in a future class. Well, this is what the palace looks like from the air today. There's the courtyard, there's the megaron building, which is basically a large open hall with wooden pillars supporting the roof, store buildings, private buildings, residences and things like that. All of this filled with Helladic ware pottery, so it's the same date as Mycenae, but something he didn't find at Mycenae because he didn't excavate the palace there. The walls of the palace were decorated, painted decoration. Exactly the same type of shield design that he'd seen at Mycenae, the same spiral motifs, again convincing him this is the same date. Remarkable paintings in a style which nobody had ever seen before, in this case of a woman, and here a painting of 2 people in a chariot. So he's made yet another major discovery. Schliemann now becomes convinced, from his discoveries at Mycenae and at Tiryns, that these are parts of a large civilization that existed in the Bronze Age in the Eastern Mediterranean. When he looks at the pottery he'd found at Mycenae and at Tiryns, he starts to look around the Mediterranean for more pottery of the same type. He eventually discovers that lots of this pottery has been found on the island of Crete, then under Turkish control, and same type of pottery was then being found in Egypt, and I'll make that connection in a future class. He decides that Crete must be the center of an amazingly large trading empire, probably trading in tin, which is needed to make bronze. Crete he knows about from Greek legend. Crete, the subject of another class, is the home of the legendary King Minos and the Minotaur, the half-man, half-beast. Pausanias tells Schliemann where the palace is to be found. So Schliemann goes to Crete. He arrives at Heraklion, the capital. South of Heraklion, he finds a characteristic Hoyuk-type site with pottery on it of late Helladic ware type. He's convinced he's now found Knossos, the home of King Minos. He gets a permit from the Ottoman government and then discovers he's got a problem. The land at Knossos was divided between Greek villages and Turkish villages. It was covered with olive trees. He has to negotiate with both sides. He starts with the Greeks. They ask him a ridiculous price of money for the land. He bargains, he brings them down bit by bit by bit by bit. Schliemann is wealthy, but he's not going to be cheated. The Greek villagers agree. He then goes to the Turkish villagers. They heard what the asking price was at the beginning of the talks with the Greeks. They heard what the Greeks had got. They doubled the original price. And Schliemann said, no way, I'm not going to pay this money to work here. So he went back to Athens, but for the rest of his life he was determined he would excavate at Crete. And we'll see what happened when Crete was excavated in another class. So he went back to a fourth season at Troy in 1888 to 1890, again with Dorpfield. By 1890 they found the earliest levels. Dorpfield had been going through, in the meantime, had basically systematically analysed everything that Schliemann had found. He knew that Schliemann had basically just cut his way through the whole site with the Great Trench as if it was a cake. Troy 1, Troy 2, Troy 3, Troy 4, Troy 5, no, sorry, Troy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There were 9 basic occupation levels at Troy. Dorpfield shows the evidence to Schliemann. Schliemann was convinced that this one or this one was the ancient Troy. There's this section, the diagrammatic section through Troy showing you the basic structures there. But Dorpfield was able to show that actually the Troy of the Trojan War probably wasn't the second Troy at the site, this place where he'd found Priam's treasure. This was a site that belonged to the Copper Age. Remember, when he found Priam's treasure, he found objects of copper, not bronze. The Iliad is about the Bronze Age. The real Troy, if it was the real Troy, was actually Troy 6 and Troy 7a. And this model shows you what Schliemann thought was the real Troy, and this is what Dorpfield came up with as evidence for a city that belonged to the right period in the Bronze Age. Able to see the walls of Troy 6, you can see the walls and the gateways of Troy 6 as well. Well, Schliemann decided we've got to get back, 1891, do more work on the site. That winter, he went to Naples. He had an ear infection, but he wanted to go and see the city of Pompeii. On Christmas Day, he collapsed in the street, unable to speak but conscious. People thought he was a beggar. He was just wearing his excavation clothes. He was taken to a police station. They found a piece of paper in one pocket with the address of a doctor on it. Got the doctor. The doctor came and said, "This is Heinrich Schliemann. He's not a beggar." Doctor went into his pockets, pulled out a handful of gold coin. But it was too late for Schliemann. He died a few hours later. He probably suffered from meningitis, which is an infection of the brain, and this time not properly recognized, but it usually starts off as an ear infection. So he was taken back to Athens, where he was buried in the most elaborate tomb in the first cemetery, the major cemetery at Athens. The tomb in the style of a Greek temple up here with a bust of Schliemann at one end and decorated along the sides with scenes from the Trojan War. A beautifully fitting inscription and decoration for that tomb. Schliemann's death really marks the end of one particular phase in the development of modern archaeology. His excavations were more of a private crusade to prove the truth of the Iliad and the Odyssey. He was rich, he was enthusiastic, he did not let anything get in his way. He made great discoveries wherever he put a spade in the ground, Tiryns, Mycenae and Troy. If he had got to Crete, he would have made a great discovery there as well. And the truth is that Schliemann did find clear evidence for two Bronze Age centres, Troy and Mycenae, and at Mycenae in particular, evidence for a Bronze Age civilization that nobody ever suspected existed. A Bronze Age civilization in which people were buried with gold masks, they had access to gold, probably from Egypt, they had lapis lazuli beads, ostrich eggs, rhytons, all that type of thing. It was going to be many years before the significance of Schliemann's discoveries were properly recognized, but already at the time of his death, people knew he had found something remarkable. Well, what about Schliemann himself? Some people would say he's a megalomaniac. He was absolutely determined to find what he wanted to find. His admirers called him a genius. The experts called him a lunatic for believing in these old stories. He was certainly not a very trustworthy type of person. We have to remember here, he left California very quickly, under a cloud, either for corruption or for robbing the people who were using his bank, or for evading tax, we don't know. He claimed to have got a PhD from the University of Rostock. Nobody's ever seen the thesis, nobody's ever seen a piece of paper that says that this is the case. He went to America to get divorced from his Russian wife. The papers he used to get an American passport to make that possible were faked. The divorce papers were faked as well. Schliemann was also not exactly what we can call an expert archaeologist. To find the Troy of legend, he had no hesitation at digging all the way through buildings, temples, houses, and everything else. When you read the report of his work at Troy, it reads like an excavation campaign gone mad. Today we demolished a temple. Oh, we found an inscription to Athena. Today we destroyed this, and on the way. Nothing got in the way. He wanted to get to the bottom. On the other hand, he's working at Troy in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. You look at what else is happening elsewhere in the world at this time. In Egypt, graves are being robbed left, right, and centre. The same throughout most of Europe. So he fits into the general pattern of archaeology at that time. So we can't really say, yes, he's a treasure hunter, because all archaeologists were treasure hunters at that time. But although he wasn't a trained archaeologist, and his obsession was the Trojan War, he did actually make a good enough record of everything he dug through, so that in the 1880s and 90s, Dorpfeld could reinterpret what he'd found and established that there were no less than 9 separate cities of Troy. More importantly, he didn't just save the gold and silver. He saved small pieces of pottery. Now, to a modern archaeologist, a piece of pottery is usually a lot more valuable than a piece of gold. Pottery can be dated. We can tell where pottery comes from. We can tell what pottery is used for. Pottery tells us more about ancient society than gold, if the truth must be known. What we see in Schliemann's notebooks are very careful records of all these various finds. The only problem is we can't really trust Schliemann's notebooks. This is Schliemann's notebook, his discovery on the Priam's treasure, and notice how he's corrected the date on the top there. What his notebook tells us is that he went to the excavation and saw the flash of gold in the side of the trench, went to get Sophia, told her to tell the workmen to have the rest of the day off, it was her birthday. She then came down, wrapped it all up in her coat, and took it back to the excavation house. Well, what does Sophia's diary tell us? She was in Athens with her mum and dad on that day. This creates a problem, of course, because we cannot be absolutely certain that everything that's called Priam's treasure was actually found all together in the same place at the same time. For archaeologists, this is a great problem. Remember when I was talking about Thompson and the value of closed groups, burial groups? Anything found buried together had to be placed there at the same time, so it was in use at the same time. But with Priam's treasure, we cannot be certain that everything that was found in the treasure does actually belong to the treasure. So it does create an enormous problem for us. There was also, of course, that element of dishonesty in what happened to Priam's treasure. Once the Greek government refused to take responsibility for it, what does Schliemann do? He offers it to the Imperial Museum in Berlin on condition he's made a member of the Prussian Academy of Sciences. Well, in the end, he ends up selling it to the Berlin Museum. And it stayed in the Berlin Museum on display until 1944. In 1944, the Second World War, it became obvious that Germany was going to be defeated, occupied by the Russians. So the German authorities decided to place it in the most secure place they could, the zoo bunker. In that area of Berlin known as the Tiergarten, the zoo garden, this was actually a fortification designed to shoot down enemy aircraft. Well, the zoo bunker was one of the last places to be captured by the Russians in May 1945, and this is the remains of a Russian tank outside the zoo bunker. And when the Russians went inside the zoo bunker, they said, couldn't find anything. No trace of it. Priam's treasure had disappeared. Well, many things disappeared. Many great art treasures disappeared in 1945 and during the Second World War. In 1993, the Russians said, well, actually, we've got it in a box in the Pushkin Museum in Moscow. And they started to put it on display again in 1996. The then head of the Department of Antiquities in Turkey, happens to be the husband of my ex-boss in the Department of Archaeology, entered into discussions with the Russian government about getting this back. The German government started discussions about getting this back. Russia had agreed with Germany in about 1992 that anything stolen by the Russians from Germany would go back to Germany, but they said, this is one thing we're not giving you back. As for the Turkish government's request, you must be joking. There is an international agreement that anything removed from a country after 1972 should go back to that country. This was taken out of Turkey in 1873. And more to the point, the court case in Switzerland had decided it was the property of Schliemann anyway. So Schliemann should get it. And so if you want to see Priam's treasure and the headdress that Sophia was wearing, you have to go to the Pushkin Museum. But you know, there is one little add-on thing from all of this, and that is, about 5 years ago, the descendants of Frank Calvert said, it was found on our land. We want some money for it. It was found on the land that was owned by Frank Calvert. We want 1/3 of it. Well, that's a law case that's still going on and on and on. But I'm afraid that for now, if you want to see the Pushkin, you want to see Priam's treasure in all its glory, the Pushkin Museum is where you go to next. Okay, all right.